Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our next edition or unit, which is African kingdoms. So, when you look at African kingdoms, here is today's do now. This is sort of going back to the yonder days of our old um, sixth grade unit on advanced civilizations. So, when you look at an advanced civilization, well, what makes it advanced? That is the concept of I want you to pause this video and answer that question if you have not already done so, which is what makes an advanced civilization advanced. So pause this screencast and go and answer today's do now. Okay, so thinking back to sixth grade, what makes an advanced civilization is simply this. It's a system of writing, they have technology, they have a social structure, and a stable food supply. So keep those four things in mind as we move forward with today's lesson. Your objective today is by the end of class, you'll be able to identify key aspects of an African kingdom. And by the end of class, you'll be able to take notes on different African kingdoms. So when you look at Africa, it can be broken into 5 different regions: Northern Africa, Western Africa, Middle Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. And we'll take a look at kingdoms in all of these different regions. But first, when you look at the idea of a kingdom, Africa is broken into multiple parts, which are city-states as well. They're African kingdoms, I should say, not Africa itself. Remember, a city-state is its own territory, has its own governments and laws, and it's both an independent city and a state. Perfect example of a city-state, Vatican City. It is the world's smallest country. It's literally the size of a building. So it's this building plus the plaza. That is it. That is Vatican City. Now, in a lot of these African nations, specifically in southern Africa, they spoke a language known as Swahili. This was it's a combination of Bantu and Arabic words. Again, it's mostly used throughout most of southern and eastern Africa. So here are some examples of this language. The word for fruit is matunda. The word for egg is mai. The word for chicken is kuku. Word for duck is bata. Swahili for bread is makate. Trout is papa. Dates, not like going on a date, but the fruit date is tende. And water is maji. So this is just an example of some African words. So as you're going through, and you may do some reading later on, or you may do some investigating, you'll see that the Bantu language is even still used in a lot of southern Africa today. So our first kingdom is the Kingdom of Axum. Axum was established around the year 300 and ended around the year 700 AD. Is located in present-day country of Ethiopia and Eritrea. They had major trade routes that stretched all the way from the Red Sea to India. Here's what's interesting about Axum is it is the only Christian nation or kingdom in all of African history. And they would be around until the Arabs took control of that region, which made them unique. But when something makes you unique, it also makes you a target. So all of these red lines represent the trade route that Axum had. Oh, look, the Nile River. Oh, obviously, they traded with the Egyptians. So that was obviously a major trade route. They did all of the Red Sea, and they even went as far as India. Now, what makes Axum pretty cool, in my opinion, is the idea that, yes, they were a Christian faith, but they dug their church in solid stone. And it goes into the ground. They carved this down into the ground so that invading forces would not be able to see them. And this path here, this tunnel, is how you get to the church. They also built this giant tower. This is to represent their chiefs. So they had some pretty amazing architectural designs, which make them unique in my eyes. Kilwa. The kingdom of Kilwa began around, or Empire Kilwa began around the year 900 and ended in the year 1513. They had a cool system of taxing, and they lived in multi-story buildings. They were destroyed by the Portuguese in the early 1500s. Now, their tax system was pretty unique, and we actually still use a lot of their taxing today, even here in the United States. It's hard to believe it, but we do. When you look at how they taxed people, say you were, excuse me, say you were a merchant and you wanted just to get into the kingdom, they charged you $25. Just to get into the kingdom, that was just to get in. You didn't have to do anything else, just to get into the kingdom. They charged you a tax to get in. Okay. So now you want to sell something. Oh, that's another $25 to set up a booth. So now you're already out $50 just to set up a booth. Now you're starting to sell your goods, and the king happens to walk by. The fact that the king's walking by and waving to you, that's another $10. Just for the king walking by and waving to you, you had to pay the king an extra $10. Now, the Portuguese thought this was great when they first found them in the year 1500, but they didn't really care, and they sold the whole kingdom off into slavery, bringing an end to Kilwa. Kilwa is located in modern-day Tanzania. It is actually a little island nation. It's a little island right here in Tanzania. And this is some of the architectural remains of the Kingdom of Kilwa. Great Zimbabwe. They were only around for a very short period of time. They're known for their architecture. No one really knows why they disappeared. They sort of just left and abandoned their city. A lot of people attribute it to drought or famine. They're located along the Limpopo River in southern Africa, or in the country of Great Zimbabwe. Here's a map. And here are their buildings. They made these out of solid stone. And no one knows how they built them, why they built them, or what their purpose was. They believe this larger circular structure was the palace, and these smaller ones were residential. But again, they were more known for their architecture. So now let's shift our focus to Western Africa, or the area in green. We looked at Eastern Africa first. Ghana. Kingdom of Ghana began around the year 800 and ended in the year 1240. It was located between the Senegal and Niger River, and it was controlled most of the trade in West Africa. They grew wealthy from taxing salt for gold. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. They made all of their money by trading salt for gold. Think about that. I'm going to trade you a bar of gold for a bottle of salt. And that's what they did, because the rest of Africa did not have salt, and they had plenty. So everybody traded them the gold that they had for salt. And eventually, that's how they became so rich. The Kingdom of Ghana began to weaken, and they lost a series of wars, and they were absorbed by the Kingdom of Mali. So here's the Kingdom of Ghana. Now keep in mind, we're going to see the same spot 3 different times. And here's some of their architecture, which can still be seen today. Now, the Kingdom of Mali rose up in the ashes of Ghana's downfall, established in the year 1200 and ruled by a man named Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa ruled under Islamic law. Mansa Musa, to this day, is probably the wealthiest person to ever live on the face of this earth. He had so much gold that he could almost give everybody in the world during this time, if he had to, he could get everybody in the world over $1,000 and still have money for himself. He was basically 10 times richer than Bill Gates today. And Bill Gates is probably the wealthiest person in the world. So this gives you an idea how wealthy he was. Mansa Musa ruled, for a very long time. And unfortunately, when he died, he left the kingdom to his 2 sons. And they couldn't agree on how the kingdom would be ruled. And the kingdom fell relatively shortly after his death and was absorbed by the kingdom of Songhai. Here's a palace that's still there today. They actually use this as a governmental building today, so it's still in use. The Songhai, started right after the end of Mansa Musa's death. Their biggest trade city was the city of Timbuktu, but was defeated in 1591 by northern African invaders. And that brought about the end of Songhai. Songhai, I mean, they just continued the same thing that Ghana started, which was salt for gold. And when you look at the year 1591, by this point, the Americas were already in full swing, and they needed someone to trade. And you not really trade, but they needed someone to work the plantations. And slavery is going to be the end of a lot of these kingdoms in Africa. And here's Songhai with the trade city of Timbuktu. Again, more similar architecture. Benin was located in South Africa as a forest kingdom. They lasted for about 900 years. They were great artists. Again, they liked to use a lot of wood. That's why I put the word twice. And they were destroyed by Europeans. They officially came to an end in 1847 as the English actually put an end to their cultural advancements. But slavery did hurt a lot of this kingdom as well. Here's a little Benin down here. Tiny little thing. And here's some of their artwork. Now we're going to shift to North Africa. Carthage, probably one of my favorites. Began in the year 800 and in the year 146. They were located in North Africa and modern-day Tunisia. They are best known for their engineering and architecture and military. They were finally destroyed by Rome in the Third Punic War. The Carthaginians were also direct descendants of the Phoenicians over in the Middle East. And when you look at the Carthaginians, they had such advanced architecture and engineering. They carved a port that looked like a giant eye, and they were able to they had a strong military, they had a strong navy, they had a major trade network, and it was really their greed and angst against the Romans that would bring about their end. And I'll show you a video later on about Carthage. So here is Carthage's empire, how far they stretched. Again, really what brought about the end of Carthage was this little island right here. Rome and Carthage went to war over Sicily. They just didn't agree with each other. And ultimately, this little island would bring the end of this vast empire. So here's an example of the port of Carthage. This center part here was for their navy. This part was for the merchants. And this is what's left of it today, because Rome would burn Carthage to the ground after the end of the Third Punic War. Nubia, our longest running empire besides Egypt. They began in 3100 BC and ended in 400 AD. Again, they were known for going back and forth with Egypt. You studied them last year. They were actually destroyed by Axum, ironically. And Nubia was down here in the bottom part, so it's called the Nubian Desert. And they had the same things as the Egyptians. Egyptians and Nubians basically had the same things. Same thing with Egypt, but Egypt would fall to Alexander the Great in Greece around the same time that Nubia would fall to Axum. I'm not going into detail in Egypt because you studied this last year. So in your opinion, why did all of these kingdoms all develop so differently? So take a minute to answer that question on the document I'll provide for you. So you could pause this screencast and go answer that question. So now what you're going to be doing is, so what? You looked at all of these African kingdoms, so what are you going to do about it? Well, I want you to pick one of these African kingdoms, and I want you to design a magazine cover. Here are some examples of magazine covers, of famous magazines. I want you to create a magazine cover that has a date when the civilization began and ended, a map outlining your kingdom's territory, and what happened to your civilization. Why did it come to an end? And their major accomplishments. Here's an example of an older one that a student did a few years ago. So again, doesn't have to be crazy, but be creative. You're going to use the Google drawing template that I provided for you. Or if you want to use some other template format, be my guest. Google Drawing, a lot of people found easier just to embed things. So if you have any questions, you could email me. Otherwise, that is it. Hopefully you enjoyed today's lesson on African kingdoms.